Hello and welcome everyone to our second session for the Fall Heifer Management webinar series. Today we have Casey Mickelson with SE Agriculture and Commercial Solutions. So I'm pleased to introduce Casey as our speaker for today's session. Casey is a territory manager and ag specialist with SE Agricultural and Commercial Solutions out of Byron Center, Michigan. Casey has worked alongside farmers to build new dairy facilities, including cattle barns and feed kitchens, which, if you ever get a chance to visit a feed kitchen, highly recommend it. They are so cool to see. And he's also worked alongside farmers to retrofit their facilities to achieve new goals of the farm. He is passionate about creating facilities and installing equipment that makes sense for both the cow and producer. Some of his favorite projects include helping improve calf barn ventilation and updating old barns and equipment to optimize operations. I'm excited to hear what Casey will share with us today on heifer housing strategies so that we can manage heifers through our farm facilities. Casey, take it away.
You got it. Well, hello all. We'll be looking at heifer housing opportunities here. So as we dive in, we start with the planning approach. So obviously everyone is not building new all the time. We're working with the facilities that we have available. So it really is a planning approach to take a look at what makes sense for you. So first, looking at needs versus wants. There's a lot of wants out there, but we really need to focus, especially as budgets dictate. We got to look at the needs of what really makes sense to take steps forward, whether it's growth, optimization, and efficiencies, um, just better management, or even if, as this one's focused on heifers, are we housing heifers on farm? Are we backgrounding them with someone? Are you switching over and completely getting out of the dairy side and switching over to like a beef and heifer raising operation? Then looking at the facilities that we have. So these two pictures illustrate, are we going to remodel or new build slash expand our current buildings? Um, a lot goes into that. Looking at that, we have to look at space on the farm, expense of building. Does it make sense to expand, or does it make sense to use the square footage you already have and reconfigure it to make it work? And what does that reconfiguration look like? Is it a building that was built that can be modified to be well used, or is it kind of a smorgasbord building that is going to be very difficult to efficiently run as time goes? Another big part too that I talk with clients about is like this year versus 5 years and down into the future. Does it make sense? Which direction are you actually heading? We don't want to spend, money or do some projects that are going to then hurt as we move forward, trying to get you to your longer term goals. So taking a moment to kind of look at that and say, okay, what are we trying to do right now versus what are going to be moving forward? And then management versus execution. We can build the perfect barn, but when we leave, it's your management, it's your team that has to run this barn, that has to care for the animals in it, that has to actually execute within that barn. And so that's a big deal because the perfect barn for one operation may not be the perfect barn for a different operation. So getting in front of that too and looking at, what are you trying to do? How are you going to walk through this? What makes the most sense in that manner is going to make some really big impacts as we take steps forward. So then that opens up to layouts. So there's so many different ways that we can do buildings for you. Uh, it's, we've got steel, hoop barn with a vinyl top, we've got post frame, and we've got hybrid. There's different reasons for all of those. We've got it's like a scrape alley setup with a bed pack versus scrape alleys with a freestyle setup versus slap barns. And all of those can look at how you manage those animals, how you care for those animals in different ways. It also changes the footprints of what we need for buildings. Um, this is a monoslope with a bed pack style setup that um, it allows cleaning up that front while you basically stockpile your manure in the back. You can also do this kind of a setup with a constant clean out and then rebed versus a freestall setup. Um, with heifer growers, there's different considerations about training the animals, raising them in a certain way so that way when they hit the dairy, they're kind of ready to go. There's different thoughts on that, and that kind of goes back to your relationship with whatever dairy these heifers are going to. So, different building materials give us different options with the buildings. So, monoslopes open up a large wall. You have a lot of times south facing. You end up with a lot of sunlight that way. It allows for a lot of fresh air to come into those buildings. There's different ways to control that with curtain systems, etc. Um, Whereas the hoops, this example at the bottom shows that we can do an end wall over the door vent curtain system. So it gives you some control, but still allows for a lot of air exchange even in that upper portion of the barn. Hoops also beneficial with you get a lot of natural light through those. They are a little bit more maintenance heavy than a traditional either post or steel frame building because it is that vinyl roof. The other picture on the lower is of actually a hybrid building, so it is steel and wood. One of the big benefits of this is actually it's a roost-free design, so it's not perfectly bird-free, but it's pretty darn close. Because of the way that that wood comes into the steel, you are able to remove that traditional truss that allows for a lot of nesting spaces. You also lose a steel on steel ends up with space above the rafter, um, which again allows for nesting spaces, places for birds to roost. Um, this hybrid model kind of negates some of that. Uh, Post with these designs, hoops, you're pretty much clear span design. So that means you get it's a very open feeling building. You don't see a lot of posts all the way down. With any of the post frame or the steel or the hybrid models, we can look at clear span all the way up to having a post on your feed alley as well as on your head to head, depending on what kind of a model you're looking for, how are we planning for fans or other equipment, and then also the economics of it. We can kind of play with that and try and figure out what best match both budget and function. Um, the monoslopes, um, they're they're pretty nice and open. You get a lot of headspace with that. The newer buildings that we're seeing that are the gable style, like this one, um, where it's still a traditional looking truss style. We're getting a lot more sidewall height on those than older buildings that you've probably seen. So that's still opening up very well for ventilating those buildings as well, and providing some natural lighting in there. Sometimes adding a few fans just to circulate some more air can all of a sudden refresh a building that you're working with. Sometimes we have to go a little bit further with that and look at like a tunneling option, which we'll talk about. Um, and sometimes the airflow is truly just magnificent in these buildings. You know, they're set up where they're capturing that west wind. They're on a hill. They're just flowing through, and you're managing either the bed pack, the bedding, whatever the cows are utilizing. You're managing that to a point where you're not having, ammonia buildup. And we still want to look at manure management with all of this. So are you scraping? Are you looking for a bed pack? Are you looking for a slatted barn? Slatted barns are going to have more initial cost, but are going to be probably the most labor efficient versus your scrapes or your bed pack. Bed pack obviously builds up. You still have to manage that bedding over time. But as far as big cleanouts, it's less frequent, generally speaking. That dives into once we kind of figure out, okay, what kind of buildings are we thinking? We want to look at the equipment side, um, stall sizing, and looking at flexibility with that, drinkers, curtains, feeds, feed style. So stall sizing. Heifers, a lot of times we can get away with a 1.9-inch stall, the size of that tube. 2 3/8 is beneficial. It's a little bit hardier. You get a little bit bigger package there. As far as steel, it does cost more generally, so it depends on what age cattle are you going for. If you're on the younger heifer side, the 1.9 generally seems to suffice. If you're getting closer and closer to mature heifers, the heavier duty is could provide better longevity for you in your equipment. Always, you got to worry about that big yellow bull that drives through, pushing all that manure to or cleanup. They swing around, and that thing, it'll take out free stalls for sure. Um, the two pictures on the bottom here show just a post mount, basic traditional. One is a sleeve style, one is a strap style. Those work great if this barn is purpose built and it's going to be for you picking aged cattle. That is the cattle that's going to go in that barn forever. That works out as a great system. Generally speaking, those are probably a little bit more economical as price per stall. You do have to figure out your wood post cost in that. But generally speaking, it's a fairly straightforward package. Now, if you're looking at anything in the future, say this is a transition barn where right now you have young cattle in one pen all the way up to springers in your final pen, and they're getting larger and larger, but you're also changing your farm model as you move forward. And this barn may just turn into a one size cattle as you expand down the road. You may not want to lock yourself into that like post mount stall. That's where that upper picture shows a bio rail system. That rail system gives us the flexibility. Now, this isn't for each group of cattle. You're not going to want to do this. But if, you know, 2 years down the road, you change that pen for older cattle, having that capability to adjust your stalls, tighten up, uh, loosen them up to make a wider stall available for a bigger cow. That could be a win for you where now you're not having to reinvest in a full barn of equipment. All you have to do is adjust, maybe add a few parts, but suddenly your system is working for you no matter what you decide to do with that barn. The other nice part about the biorail system is, uh, especially on sand bedded barns, that biorail tends to pull up the bottom of your stall and all your attachment points out of the sand a little better than those post mount systems. And that's where you get that animal drool, that sand, and it really grinds and corrodes away. So a little bit of a longevity win that way too. Drinker availability, especially if you're looking at like remodeling or moving different cattle in than what that barn was initially planned for. We want to make sure that water availability is a big key in making sure that we have enough accessible. It's one of those things where, oh yeah, there's a drinker in there. We put in different cattle. It may not suffice if it's like one of the small ones with heavier cattle as shown in that top picture. There's also rebating available for drinkers too, so that's something too that you can look for wins with your local utility company. If you're replacing drinkers or expanding and adding areas with drinkers, you might be able to save a little bit that way as well. Feed area then drives into how am I feeding my cattle today? Where are these cattle going tomorrow? And is there anything in between that we want to look at? Also, handling. How do I handle? How do I operate? So feed rail obviously is an option that's probably the most straightforward option. However, it's the least containing option. So if you're running, especially with smaller cattle, a feed rail may present some challenges where you'll be out in the barn or out in the yard, and boom, you got cattle that are out. That's where the feed trainers in that middle picture are kind of that happy in between. They start lining cattle up. They start giving that dedicated bunk space. It kind of gives them that feel right at the feed alley, um, but it doesn't have any extra functionality. Whereas the headlock, now you actually have control over those animals where you get them up there. It does the same thing the feed trainer does as far as bunk alignment. However, now you can lock them in if you have to do checks, vaccinations, anything repro. It gives a lot of flexibility that way. Um, so depending on what are you doing as an operator, what makes sense for you today, but also thinking about, do I need to worry about training these heifers for anything future as we move forward? Um, and then ventilation and curtains are a big part of that for sure. Looking into our curtain setups, you can go as simple as a hand crank all the way up to an automated system that is run off a weather system that includes, changes in temperature, precipitation. Different buildings are going to have different designs and needs as to what curtains we're looking at. Traditionally, you're probably going to see a single run or a double run on most gable style buildings, as we see in this photo here. So you have your top and bottom mono slopes like this setup. Depending on if that feed alley is inside or outside, will change how they set up their curtain. Sometimes they just rely on that southern exposure and keep it open and then close down the north side to kind of help maximize that sunlight. Another nice design, if it matches your management, going with a smaller curtain on the top, whether that's your sidewall short enough that you can get away with two, or you add that third one, you can shut up and block most of the weather with the two bottom curtains, but leaving a 2 to 3 foot for that top curtain. It gives you better control to be able to get some fresh air in, even if it's a little bit crisp. That fresh air will flow in through the top. Nice cold air will drop down, refreshing the air around the cattle, and then open up the possibility of that warming up and pulling out and getting that air circulation going just by natural ventilation. Another tool that historically, I'm afraid it's been a little bit of a silver bullet. I think it's a tool to have in your toolbox, but not something that is going to be like a fix-all, is a calf tube or a positive pressure tube. It does do a very good job at dropping in fresh air. It can travel down the length of the barn, as you see in the upper picture. Um, the the one tricky of it is it dumps in fresh air very well, but that fresh air has to go somewhere. It is a positive pressure system, but what I found is that it doesn't have a lot of force behind that positive pressure, and so without some sort of planned exhaust route, um, the air does not move very quickly. So it does a very good job at getting that air in. I think it's a tool to match, like with an exhaust fan system or something like that, where we can match it up with something, get some fresh air in there, and then push it out. Or look at some other stuff based on, what are you trying to do, and let's find the best bang for your buck to match. Which then kind of leads us into fans from there to get some circulation. Those cows are laying down. That means that their noses are going right into, how, depending on how they're bedded, they're going into that bedding. We want to make sure that that fresh air is getting all the way down to where they're going to be, not just, uh, you know, 6, 8, 10 feet up in the air. So fan options have come a long way. This is just a few examples of what we see out in farms all around us. We can go as full tilt as an automated uh, tunnel vent type system where those fans are working in conjunction with what is the weather doing, how is the barn reacting to that, shutting off in different zones. We can also get them to stage where they'll run at 25, 50%. Um, and that can be used in a lot of different ways. Right now in Michigan, we're seeing that in dairy barns and then also some calf barn setups. Not a lot with the heifer setups as of right now. Um, and then we pair that with internal circulatory fans, which these are just two examples of that. The lower one is our classic belt drive fan. They do have replaceable parts. There is extra maintenance that way with those, but they're kind of like the old historic, true blue fans. Then you have your direct drive fan that is a little bit newer, but it also provides extra opportunities. We can pair that up with some automated thermostats to be able to click on and off at different percentages based on how hot it is. They kind of take care of themselves in that. Getting that circulation through there. This is going to be a conversation of how old are the heifers that we're looking at? Are they fully weaned? Are they self-ruminating and then thus, self-generating heat? And we're going to want to talk with both the farm and the vet to make sure everybody's on board that we can get some airflow with fans, not just passively like with a calf tube or with curtains open. If you really want to crank it up, the tunnel venting is something that we've seen more so with the younger and then with the on the dairy side. The in between heifers, it's not there. But tunnel venting allows for basically mechanically ventilating your barns. So you're still going to have an inlet, probably controlled with a curtain. But then you literally create a tunnel of air that's going to open up and keep basically a breeze through that barn, allowing for constant fresh air moving not only over those animals but provided for those animals. So we're seeing more and more of that start to pop up here in Michigan. Out west, they've been doing it for some time. Pairing all of these with the right curtain setup, fan setup is pretty imperative to make sure that you're actually getting the benefits out of these fans. But there are a lot of different ways that we can kind of tweak systems to make it work best for you. So maintenance as well. Don't just run that equipment one time per year or go in and like we're gonna fire it up because we need it because like fans. Oh, time to fire them up because it's 65 degrees. We got to get some airflow going through here, but we haven't looked at the fans or done anything with them since we shut them down in October or November because it's Michigan or sometimes January. So this is just a parts illustration on a belt fan. We're probably looking at bearings, maybe some of the pulleys, the belts, the tensioner. Um, those are good parts to keep on hand at just in inventory. Not that your local guy, whoever you work with for parts, not that they won't have them, but if you're thinking about it, there's probably several other, maybe several hundred other farms thinking about that at the same time and probably around the same time of year. So having some of those parts just at your farm in inventory, sometimes you can get ahead just by that. The other one, switches and fuses, drinker plugs. Heifers have been known to, for whatever reason, like that rubber plug. And that can make it a mess of its own. So, some of those, they're not real expensive parts, but having an inventory on hand can sometimes be just a lifesaver in those moments. Running the equipment, your doors, whether it be a garage door, a vinyl door, even slider doors, having those open and close more than just, at the end of the season. I've seen it with garage doors where birds decided that is their new home. So they're covered with everything, including nest. The vinyl doors, open and closing them, once a month allows to keep rainwater and anything else from like grow setting up in there and getting kind of stored in there. That's going to relieve some of the pressure off those pipes. It's going to help keep your vinyl in better shape. Same thing with curtains, running those up and down. The sand's not going to build up in them. The weeds that might show up won't get trapped that way. You can catch it earlier than later, keep some longevity on your curtains too. And cleanliness. So this goes with all of it. You keep that vinyl on the curtains or the doors clean. You keep those garage doors clean. You keep those fans clean. They're going to last longer. They're going to work better. The fans, you'll probably notice that if it's a clean fan, it's going to output more airflow than what a dirty one would, which is going to save on both your energy, but also what the cows are feeling as well. So just trying to keep that in mind as you're looking at your facility and you know what can you do to make your life a little bit easier as time goes. That can be a real win. So on the farm, again, depending on how your heifer operation is set up, you're partnering with a dairy of some sort, probably, whether it be your own or you're backgrounding for somebody else. That's a conversation to have in what are we doing and how are we doing it and why are we doing it. I recently worked with a dairy. They ended up they had spent they upgraded a lot of their facilities. They made some stuff more efficient for their employees. But then they tunnel vented some barns. They introduced some new stalls. They expanded on their circulatory fans so that way they could really up their operation as far as having airflow to those cows, having barns that they really felt that they had a good control of. And then they realized, oh, what are we doing about our heifers? We're sending away our calves. They're being grown down the road and then they're coming back to us, but what are we doing about that to have them prepared to come home? And so we worked with that with both of those farms, and the heifer raiser ended up installing some fans to really help, alleviate some of the heat stress, especially in those real, hot moments, to provide some consistency, and really up their program as they partnered with that home dairy to make sure that they were taking care of the animals in the same manner that the home dairy was planning on seeing and was investing in too. Um, the other thing too, and we've been seeing a fair amount of this, is farms are being, changing hands. Whether they're being bought, passed down to the next generation. And so now you have different plans coming in as to what am I doing about this barn, or they're changing, which groups or the size of cattle of those groups in this barn. It isn't a one size fits all either. And so that's where, like I said, drinker, come in, evaluate. Okay, we're switching cattle size. Do we have enough water availability in this pen now? What is the error doing in this barn? Am I having issues in this barn? Are we seeing respiratory? Are we seeing illness? There are opportunities to come in to smoke those barns, to do a building evaluation. There was one that we found. The airflow was okay, but it was better in half the barn than the other barn. As we evaluated it, we realized the ridge vent was different in both sides of the barn. Their curtain operation was actually different in one part of the barn than the other part of the barn. Part of that was because of a repair. Part of that was it was all built at the same time, but the previous owner had different cattle, had different management ideas, and so they had changed bits and pieces of the barn, and then all of a sudden these different groups of heifers were brought in, and it was no longer accommodating to the cattle that were running in there. So that's an option too. I know nutritionists work with it. Your equipment guys can offer this. I'm more than willing to help with some of this as well, to be able to look at it and really up it. The other question too is why are you choosing this? So again, it's part of that planning phase as you're looking at how you're operating, what you're trying to build out with your heifer program. Why are you choosing what you're choosing? Just to give that second look and to make sure that, yep, this really does match how I manage it. How and like I said, we can build the perfect barn, but when we leave, it's yours to manage. So we want to make sure that it's the perfect barn for you and your management, not just the generic perfect barn. So, thinking through why are you choosing this? How long is this going to last? Uh, how long is your operation going to be doing it this way? What makes sense? Labor has been a real issue too, so finding efficiencies when and where we can has been very helpful with a lot of the farms that we work with to make sure that it does make sense. Um, Looking, we're partnering with your vet just because, the equipment guy's there, the nutritionist there, or the vet's there, having that partnership between them can really make some impacts. Um, Illness and issues, they do pop up. And so paying attention to that, where are they? What might be causing them? And digging in a little bit further, there might be easy fixes, and there might be a little bit more complicated fixes. And sometimes we can find a happy in between too, where a few tweaks suddenly take care of those. Um, Meds for that round, but we can avoid that with future ones, and that then itself pays dividends. And then, like I said, there's rebating opportunities as you guys are looking at it. NRCS always has money. There's utility rebates, depending on what kind of normally those are power driven ones. So drinkers, fans, lighting. Um, but then to go along with that, energy efficiency programs, there's a lot of financing out there too that can help if you are thinking about a project that can help make that feasible because it's very cheap financing when you can package it together like that as an efficiency program. And yeah, and of course, I'm the Northern Territory Manager for SE. Henry is our Southern Territory Manager. We're always looking for opportunities to help as well, to come talk through projects and like I said, if there's illness and issues that you're noticing, or just expansion or remodel, ideas that you want to go through, we're always available to walk through and talk through projects.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Casey. Um, I do have a quick question. So could you pop back to some of your first slides where you're showing the barn layouts? And could you just walk us through the picture of like the perspectives just to give everyone a
Yeah.
point of view of, what are we looking at? What are the things that, you guys are documenting when you're putting together these layouts, and what things do you take into consideration when proposing these ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one, can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay. So this one, it's a monoslope design. So you can see we've got a 21-foot sidewall on the one side and a 12-foot sidewall on the other. This one actually was to meet NRCS requirements. So this back wall, we're working with their engineer to make sure that we have a concrete wall built that meets their specs to hold the manure.
Okay.
Um, this front alley is going to be the scrape and feed alley. So we made that 16-foot wide. That is plentiful for two cows, so that way you have a travel lane with even if they're at feed. Um, this one was requested to have the four pen design with this is a flex space. This farm's plan was to hold the manure until he could haul it out. And so, but then also it provided growth for down the road that if he wanted to add pens, he could add three smaller pens of cattle that way. We've got drinkers built in, and then our cattle gating system to allow us to be able to run the cattle down for loading, unloading, that type of thing. Um, we actually modified this one where we added a handling pen here at this one end. This was the preliminary design without that. Um, we had a curtain system, so then that is covering the back here. We have overhead doors here with a slider here to be able to access the back pen. Um, this one was a steel design, so as you can see, we have 20-foot bays. So we look at all of that too to make sure that what's our bay spacing, so that way our equipment can handle that. Um, how do we access and exit? Um, and just because we get it drawn up like this too doesn't mean this is the final. This will be, brought back, talked through with the farm to make sure that they're comfortable with how do we enter and exit, how do we move cattle around, all of those types of things. The next one is a 6-row design. So generally speaking, we have our outer rows. And again, depending on cattle size, that'll be adjusted a little bit. Um, then we have it's generally a mirror image feed alley down the middle, and then it mirror images out from there. Your feed alley scrape is going to be a little bit larger, again allowing for cattle to be feeding and cattle to pass behind them. Uh, the the outer row scrape is going to be a little bit tighter. This one is a pretty traditional, naturally ventilated style barn. We have a crossover on this end. Each crossover has a drinker in it to accommodate for a number of head that we'll have in each pen. And then they had a drover access lane put in on this side. We'll work with so for manure management, if you're using like a cable scrape, we'll have space for the cable drum on one end. If you're using skid steers, that's pretty straightforward. This is a skid steer design. If you're using a vac truck, we have worked with, like mentioned, Noon to get their specs on their turns. So that way, if we're doing an interior turnaround versus an exterior turnaround, we can make sure we have space. The interior turnaround we see more often on tunnel vents because we need to control how the air flows in and out. We decrease the access points, and so then you turn here, like here at the end. We'd make sure we have enough space to make that turn all the way around. Um, Looking at economics versus posts too. Steel versus wood. How many posts do we want? We do our best, depending on the economics and what you're trying to do with your barn itself. We'll drop post here in the head-to-head, and then we can also drop post on the feed. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Um, Sometimes, yeah, different building packages will make more sense to have interior columns than not. It also allows us to, what visual effect are you looking for as well in your barn? So that way, when you walk in, is it post everywhere, or do you want to walk in and, see all the way down without obstruction as well? Um, and then this one. Slats play into it as well. Um, Hoop barns are generally clear span all the time. The hybrid, the post frame, and the all steel structures, that's where we play with the different, post, what makes sense. The vertical versus the horizontal, um, what makes most sense and bang for your buck.
Yeah. Have you done any work with like the horizontal fans versus the vertical fans of placement in large barns like in like freestall barns? Because I've seen them say in like holding pens and large open spaces where
Yep.
you don't have a ton of posts everywhere else, and yeah, have you worked with any of those kinds of fans?
Very little. So I have a few farms that have them. I've worked with a couple electricians that will put them in. Our manufacturers don't actually carry those lines. They
Okay.
found that they were a bit of a nuisance for the reward, for the
Okay.
parts and functionality. I know one heifer operator that he loves his and it works for him. Um, I think different parts of the farm could make more sense. A lot of my farms, they want to feel velocity, and those
Right.
horizontal fans, they are low velocity by design, and so you just don't feel the reward that way either. And then yeah, a lot of it is just CFM too, and while they get air movement, it's just not the same as those like horizontal breeze or vertical breeze fans or the exhaust fans that you
Right.
attach on the end walls. So
Is
it
the
could
air
make sense.
circulating, but is it actually moving through the barn? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. I was actually, could you flip to, I think it was like the first or second picture that I was really curious, just like the layout of the barn in that bottom picture, because it looked like they were like two barns kind of jigsawed together.
Yeah,
How
so
was
it's
that?
actually three barns,
Oh
like where
wow.
I'm standing. Um, that's where it's the remodel conversation and does it make sense and what are you trying to do? That one they made work for them. As you can see, they lost a lot of stalls. Right here, those are
Right.
actually support posts and they're in the stall bed.
Okay.
Um, so they actually lost stalls by doing that, like actual bed space.
Hmm.
Um, this is definitely not a design that I think anyone would. I think the farm would agree with me too that like it was a make it happen kind of
Right.
situation. So using what they had and trying to maximize as much as possible. But they, yeah, yeah, it was being talked about of like what can save, what makes sense. Can we just put
Hmm.
a new roof over it? Um, the end came down to no, it didn't make sense. It would make more sense to put money into a new barn than it would to try and save
Right.
and resurrect what they had going on there.
Right. Like that's the feasible sacrifice, honestly,
Yeah,
for what's practical to for both the producer and the cow and the folks who are working in that barn too, because that's a thing that I've talked about with some producers is, you know, you can have this design, you can have this layout, and it looks great on paper, and then once it's built, once people start working on it, you find those bottleneck points of whether it's cow movement, um, whether it's with equipment, whether it's, whatever the things, and it's the people who are working in those spots all the time, they're the ones who see that. And so I've encouraged farmers, I'm like, hey, have you talked to your employees? Have, asked them, is this a common spot where cows are potentially slipping and falling? Is this a common spot where they bottleneck and they don't want to move? Like, hey, have you noticed, any areas that should be brought to my attention in the sense of, it's somebody keeps hitting this wall because it's way too either sharp of a turn or way too tight of a space, but you have to get in there. And so then it's like, well, how can you maximize labor efficiency while also not um not really using what you thought was going to solve problems actually be the problem.
right.
So yeah, it's been a really interesting, especially with like the retrofitted situations of just like,
Yes.
okay, what do you do? But even with new builds, I mean, you mentioned that it's you'll learn something on every single job. I'm
Oh yes,
like, oh, maybe
definitely.
we should have redone this a bit, or let's what can we revisit about it? And so with that, so you talked about the farm that you showed their layout, and they decided they wanted to do like a handling cattle handling
Yep.
section in their last part. Um what pieces did they want within that? Was it a chute? Was it, something they can run for foot bath. What things did they incorporate in there that, they brought you guys in to make that happen?
Yep. So that one, they weren't running headlocks, so it was going to be a chute system, and it was both for the like medical and care and running groups through, but then it was also for the shipping aspect.
Okay.
So it was going to be, if I remember right, it was like a three sort, one to kick him back to the pen, one to put into a holding pen, and then one to actually like straight out to the truck.
Okay.
And so it was going to be another partial bay added where we had enough room for a tub with a chute, and then a holding pen, and then some sorting areas to be able to drive cattle through so we could get, a number of cattle in, but then also steer them out to the, whichever direction was appropriate.
Awesome. Um, Are there any final words of wisdom or favorite tips you like to share with people when looking at and considering either new builds or remodels, or just even if somebody's stepping into a barn and being asked, "Hey, can you, give me your thoughts?" Do you have anything?
Well, don't be afraid to use those relationships, and they don't have to be siloed. So, like I said, nutritionist, vet, your equipment, or builder guy, um, and any of those resources that you use on your farm, d- they don't have to be separated. Having them come together can be a healthy thing to really make strides forward. And sometimes that can end up in more expensive ideas, but oftentimes it can result in a more economical fix. I have one where we're looking at a calf area right now, and we're waiting for the weather to actually turn a little bit so we can get in there in the winter mode. We're gonna smoke it. The nutritionist is gonna be up there. I think it's going to end up saving money if it goes how I think it is with the once we see what the venting will actually do. But we're going to kind of mimic up what it would be with a couple exhaust fans rather than the calf tube. And the exhaust fans generally are going to, circulatory fans for sure. This exhaust fan system should be cheaper than the calf tube, and I think it's going to reap better rewards. So we're going to kind of mock it up and see what we can make happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree. Getting everybody that's part of your farm management team together at a table and say, talk about what's all going on, what is everybody seeing, because sometimes it's easier to carve out 2 hours in a month rather than 5 hours of talking to all these individual people, along with saying, oh, hey, I didn't know that this was going on, or hey, I noticed this, and oh, yeah, that's already on the docket that we're talking about. And so that just having those farm team management meetings, including your vet, your nutritionist, your loan officer, even, and any of those other people who are involved, sit down, have these conversations, set that time aside, because you get so much more done when you have that focused meeting and you can build a plan of action together because everybody's on the same page now. Everybody knows what's going on. And if there's something that's come up, you can have all those minds come together and say, what questions do we need to ask first before we just put a plan in action and go and say, oh, maybe we should have thought about XYZ. But you can also say, well, might be beneficial. Wait till it's colder to smoke the building to get the
yeah,
actual information you're looking for. Or, hey, let's do a barn evaluation. Let's look over the entire herd. Let's look at all of these different pieces and bring in employees and other folks. If you have a parlor manager, get that person involved in the conversation. So I agree. Having all those people at the table will will work better in the long run to get a plan together, because whatever happens on the farm impacts all of those people.
for
And
sure.
knowing that you have that open line of communication just makes everything flow a lot better. And yeah, in the long run, it might be a little bit more expensive to do a few fixes for what's the right thing to do, but it pays off in the long run because you have improved cow comfort, you've improved heifer comfort, you have improved ventilation, so you have potentially lower respiratory rates and lower heat stress, all of those different aspects that come into it, because then we all know it goes into improved milk production, better growth, decrease issues with reproduction. So it's all a self-feeding system, and we talk about on the management and preventative care is that we do all of these things because we know it's right for the cow.
Yeah.
And that's really the focus of it is what's right for the cow and for the operation. And we know that, one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's the beautiful part about agriculture and the dairy industry. We get to learn from each other in this
Mhm.
stuff. And so it's really great, seeing the different layouts, you talking about your experience and the things that you've learned from each job and the considerations that you encourage people to have when looking at water availability, space, stall size, all of those different pieces, and then saying, what can we do on the financial end to, buffer some of these initial costs? Are there rebate programs? Are there other sources of funding that can help farmers make the improvements that they absolutely want to do? But we all know things have gotten very expensive as of late. So, yeah, I really appreciate all the stuff that you've brought to share with us today. And so I am going to wrap up the webinar. So let me do one final wrap up with this. All right,
Yep.
so thank you everyone so much for attending, and I appreciate everyone's understanding with the little issue that I had with the recording there, so that may have popped up a couple times. And if you could please fill out our post-session survey, that will help us get any information on what you found valuable from today's webinar with Casey. And if you have any questions, please reach out to either one of us, whether you want Casey to come out to do a barn evaluation, talk about barn design further, and we appreciate any follow-up and feedback that you have for us. So thank you so much for joining with us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.